Dennis Collins never needed the loudest room to make the biggest move. While every other name in the classic car and reality television world raced to post the flashiest auction win or the most dramatic barn find on camera, Collins did something that confused people who watched him closely and unsettled the ones who knew him well. He went quiet, not from the industry, not from the money, not from the deals that had built his reputation over decades, but from the noise that every other collector seemed to need like oxygen. And in a world where attention is currency, choosing silence is either the boldest strategy imaginable or the signal of a man sitting on something far too valuable to share. Turns out it was both. What the cameras captured on Fast and Loud was real, but incomplete in ways that only became clear later. The sharp suits, the effortless negotiation, the friendship with Richard Rawlings that played out across television screens for years, all of that was genuine. But the version of Collins the audience watched was a carefully edited highlight reel of a much deeper story, and the parts that never made it to broadcast are the parts that actually define him. Because while that televised version was closing deals on classic muscle cars and cutting handshake agreements on barn finds, another version of Collins was moving through private estates, retired engineers' garages, and procurement channels that never appear on any public listing. He wasn't building a brand during those years. He was building a vault, and almost nobody noticed. Collins Brothers Jeep in Wiley, Texas, carries serious weight in collector and restoration circles, built over decades into one of the most respected classic Jeep operations in the country. But behind the public-facing building, past the lot full of Wranglers and CJ projects, sits a structure that the majority of staff has never entered. No signage marks it. No social media post has ever tagged its location. Entry requires a keypad that only Collins controls, and the list of people he has personally invited inside is, by every credible account, extraordinarily short. What those few people describe bears no resemblance to a showroom. Climate-controlled air runs continuously. Trickle chargers maintain every battery, tires sit protected from the slow degradation that idle time inflicts, and private ledgers, handwritten rather than digitized, document each vehicle's history, condition, and origin. No public registry cross-references anything stored there. The documentation exists solely for Collins, written in his own hand, organized by his own system. Every detail of how that space operates points to someone curating for history itself, with no expectation of applause and no apparent need for it. The question of how Collins arrived here traces back to a philosophy he developed long before any camera crew showed up. Collins understood something early that most collectors only learn after losing something irreplaceable. The rarest vehicles on Earth don't go to the loudest bidder. They go to the most trusted one. And trust, in the world of private estates, retired corporate engineers, and collections liquidated under non-disclosure agreements, builds slowly, almost entirely off the record, and collapses instantly if mishandled even once. That reputation opened doors nobody else could approach. The cars in Collins's private garage did not come from auction houses or dealer networks, and none of them surfaced through enthusiast publications or online listings. They came from phone calls, from handshakes, from a retired engineer on the other side of the country who knew someone who knew Dennis and decided that if this vehicle was leaving his possession, it was going to someone who would respect it rather than exploit it. That distinction between a collector who keeps and a collector who performs is the entire foundation of what Collins built behind closed doors. Among the most staggering elements of what he accumulated is his concentration of VIN number 001 vehicles. These are the automobiles that rolled off the assembly line before any other unit in the series, the ones manufacturers typically reserved for executive use or internal evaluation, and the ones that more often than not were either retained by the manufacturer indefinitely or destroyed outright. At least 2 verified number 0001 production vehicles rest in Collins's private facility, including a first-year Ford Mustang and a prototype BMW originally constructed for internal manufacturer testing, and neither one has ever appeared in a public photograph or auction catalog. The Mustang carries a VIN that predates Ford's first official showroom delivery date, and its ownership trail is opaque in a way that appears deliberate. One account suggests extraction from a corporate test facility through a private estate connection. Another points to a single transfer. One previous owner, one transaction, no auction record, no public sale history. That vehicle exists in Collins's garage, documented only in his private ledgers. And the weight of that reality is not lost on anyone who operates seriously in vintage automobile collecting. A VIN 001 car is not simply a car. It is physical proof that someone somewhere decided the first one built was worth protecting at the cost of anonymity. Collins made that argument without press releases, without YouTube reveals, and without any of the theatrical performance that surrounds virtually every other high-profile acquisition in this hobby. Beyond the production firsts, Collins assembled a collection of vehicles that were never intended to exist outside of corporate walls. Pre-production mules, experimental platforms, prototype builds that automakers approved for internal testing and then ordered destroyed when programs were canceled. Most of these vehicles carry no public VIN, no DMV record, and no registration history that any government database would recognize. Collectors call them ghost cars, and their presence in private hands is simultaneously thrilling and legally complicated in ways nobody involved seems eager to examine closely. One vehicle described by insiders appears to be a General Motors hybrid prototype, whose chassis architecture matches no production model on record. Its construction incorporates aerospace-grade aluminum panels alongside electronics that were not commercially available at the time of its manufacture. A separate vehicle, described as a blacked-out Mustang variant with no factory badging, a widened track stance, and bodywork unlike any known production or special edition release, occupies the darker corners of the facility. Collins has never referenced it publicly, not once, and the silence around it is deliberate enough that people who know him well enough have long since stopped asking. Then there are the automobiles with names attached to them, documented chains of ownership connecting to figures whose place in American cultural history requires no introduction. A Cadillac tied through original title records to the Kennedy estate, registered during the senator years before the White House. A Porsche 911 connected through California DMV archives to Solar Productions, Steve McQueen's own company, during the early 1970s. A Cadillac Eldorado with factory-custom pink-trimmed interior, whose ownership trail winds through Graceland and into the final touring years of Elvis Presley's career. Collins has never publicized any of these, not for auction positioning, not for YouTube content, not for the celebrity association that sells lesser vehicles for multiples of their actual worth. And then there is the Jeep. Collins has spent his professional life around Jeeps, built his entire business around them, which is exactly why, when insiders describe a Jeep in his private collection that leaves dedicated military historians without a clear answer, the observation lands differently than it would coming from anyone else. Not a CJ, not a civilian derivative, not a surplus vehicle documented through standard channels. Descriptions point to a Gulf War-era Special Forces evaluation prototype outfitted with modular armor integration points, military specification suspension, and an experimental drivetrain that some believe incorporates diesel-electric hybrid technology ahead of anything publicly acknowledged by manufacturers at that time. Collins has never filmed it, never mentioned it, and the vehicle reportedly rests under a military-grade tarp in the furthest corner of the facility. Why Collins keeps all of this locked away generates several answers depending on who you ask. Security is the obvious one. Strategy is the operational answer because revealing everything destroys the leverage that scarcity creates. But the answer that keeps surfacing among serious collectors is simpler and more uncomfortable than either of those. Some of these vehicles cannot be shown because their existence raises questions with no comfortable answers. Vehicles listed as destroyed in corporate records. Prototypes transferred without manufacturer authorization. Military equipment that left secured facilities through channels that don't appear in any public filing. Showing them wouldn't start a conversation. It would start an investigation. Deeper inside the facility sit vehicles described as forever projects. A one-of-one Mopar prototype containing drivetrain technology Chrysler was evaluating before the company's 2008 financial collapse. Never put into production, never sold, sits partially disassembled, with its components arranged with the care reserved for something irreplaceable. Collins reportedly made a personal promise to the vehicle's original designer that it would never be exploited, and everyone who knows Dennis well enough treats that as a complete explanation. Then there is the one that close friends will not describe in specific terms. Referred to only as the forbidden car, it occupies a locked room that Collins alone accesses. Some believe it is a former law enforcement vehicle carrying surveillance technology never cleared for public knowledge. Others believe it is a prototype sports car tied to a manufacturer that no longer exists. Nobody who is genuinely close to Collins presses him on it, and he offers nothing. Fast and Loud captured a version of Dennis Collins that television needed, energetic and decisive and quick with a read on a classic car's real value. But that version was a window into a man far more patient and far more serious than any reality television format could properly contain. While the episodes aired and audiences moved on to the next flip, Collins continued doing what he had always done, finding the thing nobody else found, acquiring it through relationships nobody else had built, and then closing the door without saying a word about it. The private garage in Wiley, Texas, is not a boast waiting for its reveal moment. It is the life's work of a man who decided that the most powerful collection in the automotive world is the one the world doesn't know exists. He didn't outbid his rivals. He outlasted them. And somewhere behind a keypad only he knows, the evidence of that decision sits quietly undercover. For Dennis Collins, the keeping has always been the point.